I said, what do you want us to do? And he said, we want you to draft us an ordinance that refuses to recognize corporate constitutional rights within our municipality. And I said, you can't do that. My first response, you can't do that. Right? And he said, well, we don't feel we have a choice. It's either that or throw in the towel and allow these boys to come in because we're not insulating our ordinances properly. In other words, that's how they saw it in this logical thought progression they were going through. Not only do we have to pass these laws, but we have to enforce them. And we can't enforce them if corporate rights are superstructure to come in to actually not allow us to enforce them. It's very clear, logical thinking. Which was opposite of what we were using when we said, you can't do it. And he said, well, work with us, and we don't know whether we'll, eventually pass it. We got to talk to constituents and have meetings and advertise and all that kind of stuff. I said, well, that sounds like fun. And so we went back to the office, at that point completely disillusioned with the regulatory process, and took the lead with them. And we drafted the nation's first corporate rights elimination ordinances that actually stripped corporations, and we increasingly don't use the word strip because we don't think they're legitimate in the first place, and so refuse to recognize these claims to corporate constitutional rights within their municipality. And we handed it off to them. A little place called Linzey Township in Clarence County, just north of Pittsburgh. And they advertised it. It actually appeared in the newspaper, and the newspaper didn't catch on fire. Then had an actual public hearing, public meeting to actually consider the passage of the ordinance. And we drove up, 2-hour drive. We weren't going to miss it for the world. And I sat back, and they had, just to set the scene, these rural municipalities in Pennsylvania, they don't have enough funding to actually have a building of their own. So they meet in the salt shed, where the salt is piled up in the middle for winter, because the elected officials actually drive the machines. They drive the trucks to drop the salt on the road. And so, you have a light bulb hanging from the ceiling, swinging back and forth like that, hard moving. And then you have people set up on folding chairs around the salt mound, essentially. What happened that night was a conversation I couldn't have and still can't have with most of my lawyer peers because it's beyond them. But in that room that night, farmers showed up in that building with copies of Tom Paine's Common Sense that they had downloaded from the internet and actually read it into the record that was being kept in the public hearing. Other folks showed up with Article 1, Section 1 of the Pennsylvania Constitution that says people are the source of all governing authority. And asked questions like, well, if we're the source of all governing authority, what gives Waste Management Corporation or Senator Corporation or the other corporations the power to come in and actually tell us we can't do what we need to do to protect our own health, safety, and welfare? How is that possible? And the conversation in that room that night was simply astounding to me. And then the supervisors, the three of them, voted unanimously to become the first municipality in the United States to actually refuse to recognize corporate constitutional rights within their municipality. Little place in Lincoln Township. What happened next? Well, the township next door got interested because they were having sludge shipped in from Philadelphia because Philadelphia sludge doesn't stay in Philadelphia. Philadelphia sludge comes out to rural areas and gets dumped, so that kind of stuff happens with waste and other things in areas that can't protect themselves. And so the township next door was affected by sewage sludge, and they saw what Lincoln Township done, and they went ahead and passed it as well. This ordinance dealing with corporate constitutional rights. And then the work got really interesting, because then we started getting called into these other places in Pennsylvania, these municipalities, mostly very small. First municipality to pass anything was 450 people, so just to give you an idea of size. And the conversation started to spread across the state, so that more and more municipalities began to pass these laws, and pretty soon we were at 10% of all rural municipalities in the state that had begun to adopt these kinds of laws, which frontally challenged the authority of corporations to make decisions about agriculture, energy, vegetation in some places, and those types of things. What happened next was the legislature intervened and actually floated a bill that would have created a criminal sanction, in essence, against municipalities that have adopted any of these ordinances. So it'd be nice to live in a country where the legislature would say, oh, that's wonderful what those folks are doing in stopping those corporations from coming in. And then said, what can we do to help you people in those municipalities? But instead, the track record, of course, is that the legislature operates in the opposite manner, which is to actually work in concert, wholly owned in some ways, with corporations to begin to gut the municipality municipalities by putting preemption laws in place and those other kinds of things. Fought that sucker for 6 years and stopped it cold in the legislature and did a lot of lobbying, which you guys are probably going to do over the next 2 weeks over that, trying to get the legislators to do the right thing. And in the end, the legislature didn't do the right thing after 6 years. And they passed this god-awful thing of a bill called ACRE, stands for Agriculture, Communities, and Rural Environment. And what does ACRE do? It allows corporations that are affected by these ordinances to, instead of suing, which they were doing before, hiring a lawyer and chasing after each one, they can now pick up the phone and call the Attorney General of Pennsylvania and have the Attorney General's office threaten the municipality that if they don't overturn the ordinance, that the state is going to sue them. Not the corporation, but the state, using your taxpayer monies to do so, right? Almost privatizing the Attorney General's office to service those corporations, to come in and quell the revolt that was starting to happen, but calling in state power to do that. Which a lot of people said at that period of time, oh my God, we're so sorry, that this is now ended, that you guys didn't run and you got shut down by the legislature. To which we look back and say, I think this is great. And it's great because in those places where we're working, just like we tried to convince people that corporate rights were an issue, we were talking to people about the fact that the only way that corporations are able to do what they do is because they're enabled by the system of law and the state government to do it. So they're not called permits for nothing. They actually permit the activity to occur, and they're handed out like hotcakes by the state legislature and by the state agencies. So the problem we face is not the corporation. When the communities rise up to do something, they don't meet the corporation first. They actually meet our structure of law first. The problem is not corporations. The problem is that we live in a corporate state, right? Where the corporate boys, the minority of people that run them, actually control our state government and control the federal government to some extent. That they're actually the ones pulling the strings, making decisions. And that we're on the receiving end of all that. And by and large, when we gave those talks to communities, their eyes would glaze over. And they'd say, well, the problem is not our government. The government's neutral. The government's neutral. And they make reasoned decisions, and they do this, do that. And the problem is not our government. The problem is the corporations trying to put stuff in. And we would say, no, because for the corporation to come in, it's actually enabled and accelerated by that governmental system, because it's all one unit pretty much under this corporate state. And they'd say you're a radical dude, yeah. Because that's really, that's so anti-democracy. What you're saying, if that's real, then that means we don't have democracy operating here. So, yeah, you're starting to, cross that line in that area. And so when these municipalities continued passing laws, because the new law didn't stop them, they actually kept doing it, is that the Attorney General's office dispatched assistant attorney generals to actually physically come to the meetings where ordinances had been passed in these municipalities, and he would stand. I take that back. Usually they try to get an executive session to get it out in the public eye, so that the Attorney General's office could put pressure on the municipal officials behind closed doors rather than out in the public. We had a sit-in happen at one of the municipal governments where they wouldn't allow the executive session to take place. We had 4 people sit into the private room to not allow the Attorney General's office to meet with the public officials. So, George came out on the floor, and he gave this speech about how, if folks didn't repeal this, that the state was going to sue them, and it wasn't anything personal, it was just the law. And the people in the community said, well, we take that very personally, because you're talking about our health, safety, and welfare, using our municipality as a laboratory, for testing stuff that we don't know anything about. And the 2 women there, who were part of the organized group that actually put the ordinance in the first place, physically escorted the Assistant Attorney General out of the municipal firm to his car, saying things like, well, thank you for coming, we appreciate it, but we don't really need your help here, because we've stopped sludge from coming in, and we protect our health, safety, and welfare with our lawmaking, and thank you very much, but have a good trip back here. Turns out there was an Associated Press reporter who covered the event, and he got this great snapshot of the 2 women escorting and it made the Harrisburg Capital newspaper. It became news that you had this little place, East Brunswick Township in Spokane, that said thanks but no thanks, and now it made the point to people that it wasn't just the corporation, that it was actually the state. I mean, the state had sent somebody in on behalf of the corporation to actually shill for the corporation, to push for the corporation. And in fact, public resources paid his gas and his rental car to get there, and paid for his salary when he stood up there and said, "We will sue you." And 3 days later, they sued the municipality and a dozen others over the next couple of months. They brought suit, thus making the point for us that we couldn't even make to people, just like the corporate stuff. It took a response from the system in real time so that people actually understood how the state was enabling the corporation to do what it did. The problem is not just the corporation, the problem was the governmental system that's operating. Not only just the legal doctrines, but also the fact that the corporations can use the state government at will. I mean, think about our access to be able to do that, right? To be able to get a private attorney general to operate for us in that respect. That doesn't happen. And we're so far away from that that it makes it very obvious when it happens on the other side. So what happened next? Well, a township municipality to the west of East Brunswick Township then contacted us and wanted to draft an ordinance that refused to recognize the authority of the Attorney General's office to enforce undemocratic laws, which they were then going to define what an undemocratic law was in terms of this preemption stuff and the Attorney General's office coming in. So we helped them draft that, and then they passed it. It's in a place called Packard Township in Carver County. So there was like this festering revolt starting to happen. It was small, it still is small. But disparate communities trying to deal with this stuff. But an understanding by us, because we're really at its root just a resource base and a catalyst in some ways. That's what we do. We don't go into communities once we're called and people need help with something. So we come in and we explain how the system operates to people, because nobody understands how the system operates. Yesterday I was talking to folks about the fact that if Congress passed a law, and it was 4 lines, and said, corporations shall have more rights than communities, and shall have different legal doctrines they can use to sue communities when they act out of line, basically, and violate their rights. Congress had that 4-sentence thing on the books as a statute. I think there'd be a revolution in this country. I actually do, because it would be so crystal clear. The reason why there's not is because it's so complex. It's been built like layers of sedimentary rock, these different doctrines that very few people understand. And so you've got 8,000 different things operating that people just have pieces of, but don't understand how the whole system operates. Because when you look at the whole systems approach, it's very clear that we don't live in a democracy. Right? We don't really have decision-making control over almost anything. And so our activism is very anemic. It's about assuming that we live in a democracy and trying to mobilize large numbers of people to do X, Y, and Z. Pressure politics, which we've got, has been our mode of operating. But, the idea of actually exercising democracy as the collective people in this country has become so radical a notion that nobody even really faces it anymore. And in fact, the two camps, the conservatives and the liberals, at least to me, there's very little difference between the two. They both distrust majorities at the community level make any decisions whatsoever. They're about putting into office those folks that are consistent with their values. But democratic control scares the bejesus out of them, the leaders in both political spectrums. And so in Pennsylvania, this little revolt started to happen. And, we started to chuckle because, it was not progressive liberals, it was really conservative Republicans. And so it was tough for folks in the legislature and the corporations to make them out as just tree huggers. They're doing X, Y, and Z things for, other kinds of people. Anyway, the work then at that point started to spread. And it spread first to New England, so outside Pennsylvania to New England. In New England, they were facing off against water withdrawal companies like Nestle and a company called USA Springs Corporation that wanted to come in and stick a straw in the ground and draw out their aquifer, mostly for overseas bottling operations, to sell bottled water in Italy. That was the plan, was to label it and then sell it after it's extracted. And so communities there said, well, wait a minute, we don't want our aquifer taken by Nestle or these other companies. And so we helped them draft a series of anti-corporate water withdrawal ordinances that banned corporations from withdrawing water from within their municipalities. And that was passed. And not just passed by elected officials, but even more amazing. Nestle had put in test wells that nobody knew about. They'd actually drilled test wells in a wildlife refuge that nobody knew about. So folks are hiking out in the wildlife refuge and they come across these wells. This is how all things started. And then they talked to the town government. The town government said, yeah, those are Nestle wells. They put this in, blah, blah, blah. And started a furor in the community. Nobody knew about them. Nobody wanted Nestle there. So they passed the corporate water withdrawal ordinance at the town meeting. And Nestle was actually pulled up the test wells. Keeping in mind that a lot of times corporations don't want to tangle with these things because they're new beasts. They are local Bill of Rights ordinances that actually have new civil, political, and economic and environmental rights in them, and then have a prohibition as a prohibition of the rights of the people who live in the community. So when they pass these kind of things, so the corporations come in, it's not like a regulatory battle where they can hire their experts to testify about parts per million or water pollution or odor pollution or particulates or those types of things, which we've gotten really good at over the past 50 years. But instead it becomes a battle of rights versus rights. And we don't use the phrase anymore for obvious reasons, but it's like creating a tar making, where they stick their hand in and they can't get it back out. Because every time they try to torch it, it actually is a tool for our organisms. Just like we couldn't convince folks to pay attention to corporate rights or the state government's participation in corporate enabling. In this situation, it's about every community beginning to watch real time as what they drew into law as a Bill of Rights of Sustainability in some ways for their community is then attempted to be dismantled by the very corporations that are trying to drive unsustainable projects into those communities. And so in New England now, there are other projects. The Northern Pass, which is a plan to wheel energy down from Quebec to the East Coast. You have communities now actually passing sustainable energy ordinances, which ban all unsustainable energy transmission through their community. And those laws have been passed. There's something called the East-West Corridor in Maine just last week. The town of Sangerville and probably 24 other towns along the route are now trying to stop a private highway that the state of Maine is licensing to cross from the east-west part of the state. It's going to be a toll road. And it's actually being put in by entirely private investor capital. Not only to bring tar sands oil across, but also fracked gas and using it as a utility corridor for private utility stuff. And so that's what those folks are doing. In Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York, the big issue is fracking for natural gas. And it was out of that context, the growth of those prior 100 communities that came before them, that the city of Pittsburgh contacted us. And the city of Pittsburgh became our client. And the city of Pittsburgh folks, a couple city council members, said, hey, we want you to help us draft an ordinance here in the city of Pittsburgh to ban oil and gas extraction within the city. And we want to do it as a Bill of Rights, that people have a right to a sustainable energy future, and that the prohibition is to prohibit oil and gas drilling within the community. And the city of Pittsburgh added in something which other communities are adding in, which is the rights of nature stuff, which is that ecosystems under our system of law currently are property. We own them. When you own a piece of property, it carries with it the legal authority to actually destroy the ecosystems on that piece of property. So we have a system of law under which the more property you can own, the more ecosystems you can destroy. That's what the environmental protection laws are based on in this country. And so some folks have said that doesn't sound right to me, and the way that environmental laws work doesn't seem right either. And so we're actually going to declare within our communities through passing law that nature and ecosystems are not property anymore, that they actually have independently enforceable legal rights of their own, and that community members can step into the shoes of those ecosystems to actually protect them. And it's always hard to get our brain around sometimes what that actually means. But the work in Pennsylvania got picked up by the Ecuadorians, who invited us into the Ecuadorian Constitutional Convention because they wanted to build on what those folks had done and actually put something into their own constitution. And so we worked with that process. The people of Ecuador ratified the Constitution of 2008, becoming the first country in the world to adopt a rights-based environmental protection system at the national level. And in fact, we just had the first 4 cases decided under that law. And I'm going to share that with you when I close up here. But the first case in Ecuador that was brought under the rights of nature laws was titled as the case caption because the law allows ecosystems to bring actions on their own. It was entitled the Vilcabamba River versus the City of Loja. So the ecosystem itself was a plaintiff in the case. Okay? And the case involved the local province dumping gravel into the river, changing the river's course, Folks that live along the course of the river decided to bring a suit in the name of the river. The judge decided in favor of the river and ordered restoration for the river to be paid to bring it back to whole from where it was before the construction had begun. Another case dealt with illegal gold mining. The Ecuadorian government is actually using rights of nature stuff to shut some things down within the country of Ecuador. And so there's some case law being developed around the rights of nature stuff. I'll say there is a lot happening, not just on the East Coast. The first county in the United States, Warren County, banned oil and gas extraction a couple months ago through their county commissioners who voted to do so. We also voted to recognize the rights of nature and voted to put in the Bill of Rights at the municipal level. The work that's happening in Oregon is particularly fascinating to me. The folks in Bend and Lane County who have now put forward a Bill of Rights for sustainable agriculture, in essence, within their municipalities, and put a GMO ban as part of that sustainability Bill of Rights. And so there's a lot of new activism starting to happen, folks breaking free of the old shell and moving into new things. And people ask us, where's all this headed, right? And we say, we don't know. It's going to head wherever the people doing the work take it. That's the easiest answer. But the fact is, in 5 states now, there are enough communities that have come together, that have passed these ordinances and local laws, and have come together, stitched themselves together to form statewide organizations. And just a couple weeks ago in Oregon, you had the birth of the Oregon Community Rights Network. So a statewide network that's actually going to begin to drive state constitutional change, with an understanding that these doctrines that control the box that we're in actually can only be derailed or gotten rid of, both through the state constitutional change, but also through federal constitutional change. And so next year, for the first time, these state community rights networks are going to gather. People meeting each other for the first time from different states to actually begin to envision what a new federal constitution would look like, or what amendments would look like. So all to say, the question I asked yesterday, at the other presentation was, what are we waiting for? I mean, what exactly are we waiting for? What is left to lose, exactly, in some ways? And it's time to get off our asses, and we of course have been off our asses for a while, but begin to do work that actually takes the thing over. That actually begins to dismantle these doctrines and builds a whole new system of law. As Derek Jensen, who's one of my favorite authors from the Pacific Northwest, likes to say, he writes in a piece called Forget, it's Giving Up Hope was the name of the piece. I don't know if people read it, but he said, hope is all about hoping that someone else is going to save you. Whether it's a state agency, or whether it's, Barack Obama, or whether it's, he says something from Alpha Centaurian, that turning to someone else and trying to get someone else to help us, that there's nobody there that's going to help us. And do we actually think that Monsanto is going to stop Monsantoing if we ask them nicely? Saying that it's for us to do. We're the ones that have to do the heavy lifting now because the system is dangerously off course. And unless we do it, we're cooked. We're going to have to look for another planet if another habitable one exists. And so that's where we're at today. So the exciting stuff